There's three sets of questions which have been raised which relate more to the research project and not perhaps directly only to the presentation. So I know wine and food awaits, but I'm going to answer those because I think people who ask questions should be answered. Um, the least, the one question which Ben raised is about modeling. I've had quite a lot of interesting engagement with a number of modeling experts, but including Bob Pollen at UMass Amherst, who's a minimum wage expert in the US. And Bob said to me, Gilad, when you're going to think about assessing a model, you begin with understanding how many workers will be impacted. You understand at what levels, and you understand what the elasticities are between wages and employment. And you then say, how well does the model, and all the models start with those things. How well will the model capture what are the real world observed impacts? And some of those impacts are that there's ability of firms to alter markups, that there is changes in productivity, that there is redistribution within firms, that there's other reductions in turnover, hours worked, etc., that there are overall gains from economic growth, and that there's a spurring of domestic demand. And those are some of the things which offset what are always negative elasticities, or at least in almost all sectors. And there might be others of those. And we try and understand, are the models being used able in their architecture to take account of what we know from decades of research or what actually take place? And the bottom line is that the CGE models, as have been used so far that I've seen, are simply not able to. In the Treasury modeling, there are a number of issues I could enter into, and I'll just choose one, which is how the investment function works. Investment is a function of savings, all right? And savings is made up of households, firms, government, and international, all right? In their short run scenario, they assume investments fixed, okay? Now, the increase of wages in other equations, and I know this is technical, but it is worth saying. So the increase from increased wages to firms from other equations have a declining impact on firm savings. Firm savings fall because of increased wage costs. Now, if you're assuming that those four savings equal investment and firm savings fall, then other savings have to rise to maintain that investment fixed. And it is household savings which then rise. And if household savings rise, then spending falls. The other closure which they use in their long-term projection is they assume that investment fluctuates, okay? And they assume also that in both there's the assumption that government savings and international savings are fixed, although it's not clear that's not ever made explicit, but that's what it seems like. So if investment fluctuates, you see a falling and firm savings falls, and household savings don't rise sufficiently, which they don't, then you see falling investment. So the point of this example is that the architecture of that model, and that's just one instance, one equation, is designed in a way that increased wages leads to falling firm savings and has a negative impact either on household savings and spending, or on investment. So we need to unpack these architectural issues to understand what the biases of these models are. If you're seeing a negative impact at 1,258 Rand, how low do you go, right? Is there going to be a negative impact at 800 Rand, at 400 Rand? It's simply not credible. Okay, which I am coming to. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so so that's okay. That's my second point. Okay, which I am coming to now. Okay, which so. Yeah, actually, that would have been fine if they had put you forward. I know you made a submission on their behalf, and they could have delegated you. So on the second question, which is the nature of the research they presented, you know, there's two issues here. Someone said, why is it that the evidence that's been put forward shows a minimal impact on employment? Okay, and that's not because we've looked for certain international and local experts and cherry-picked these people who are off the far end of the left spectrum. The reason why that's the evidence you're seeing is because that's the evidence. Okay, that's the international evidence that we saw earlier, right? That there's mixed impacts, that it's sectorally altered, but it's not a matter of saying there's a selection going on here. What I want to ask is why if we have international experts from the International Labour Organization, from LSE and from elsewhere, who present that evidence, and again that evidence is mixed, which we saw, right? Why is it that people are so determined to hang on to an idea that that there must actually be other evidence which shows that there's a devastating impact on employment? That's not clear to me. We did not. There were certain groups that we chose not to invite, right? We didn't, as was asked of me by someone earlier, why didn't you ask the Free Market Foundation? Because the Free Market Foundation has not put forward a report of evidence-based research. Okay? We did engage. There are other research institutes represented here, and we engaged government. So that's the answer to that question. The third point raised relate to questions which are being dealt with tomorrow, which is that there were a number of policy issues raised. And I think it's really important. There was an issue raised there on the small business sector. And I think that's really valuable. And I think the question which we hopefully will start to unpack in tomorrow's session is not how do we, in the context of trying to achieve a maximum coverage of a minimum wage which has some positive impact on poverty, how do we then design the architecture of that minimum wage in a way which accommodates all sorts of idiosyncrasies and specificities within the economy. So we will be talking about the idea of exemptions and exceptions. We'll also be reflecting more on the issue of a body which like sets that, and the Malaysian case I think is both fascinating and very useful on a body which is both expertise and tripartite. So these kind of questions which have been raised are hopefully some of the things which we'll deal with in the policy sessions which starts tomorrow morning. I think on that note we should close.